Hey everyone, my name is Shay Shmeltzer. I'm Director of Product Management at Oracle, working on our cloud development tools. Those are the tools that are used both internally inside Oracle and externally by our customers to develop applications. And welcome to this session, which is about how Oracle increases front-end developer productivity. So one of the things you should know about Oracle is that beyond building products and services, we are also building a lot of applications. This is probably a big, maybe more than half of our revenue is actually coming from those apps today. And those are Oracle Cloud Apps, specifically the Fusion Cloud Apps. There are also other modules that are being built inside Oracle, other types of apps like the NetSuite suite of applications, a bunch of global business unit applications, and we're also building a lot of applications internally to be used inside Oracle for all sorts of things. Now, across all of those applications, we have thousands of developers working at Oracle, building those applications and creating new interfaces, new web pages, new mobile applications that are all being used either externally by customers of those apps or even internally inside Oracle. And one of the key things that we're doing with those applications now is we're modernizing the user interface to a standard we call Redwood. And Redwood is the new Oracle design pattern and user experience, and it gives us a much more innovative and intuitive user interface across all our applications. Now, because we're building a lot of applications and because those applications are key to our revenue and to the functionality that Oracle provides to our customers, we're trying to make our developers as productive as possible when they are building those applications. And what we're going to cover in the session today is how we made our developers more productive when they are building those Redwood-based user interfaces. And the key thing for you to know is that you can leverage the same tools, technologies, design approaches, methodology when you're building your own application inside your company. So the main tool that we'll be talking about today is called Oracle Visual Builder. And Visual Builder is a visual development environment that helps developers create applications that leverage the technology stack of JavaScript, HTML, and REST. And as you probably know, this technology stack is basically the de facto standard today for how people build modern web and mobile applications. But the thing with developing HTML, JavaScript, and REST is that in a lot of cases, this involves a lot of manual coding. And what we're trying to do for our developers is reduce the amount of coding that they need to do and allow them to develop the applications in a much more visual approach. And through a visual approach, we can achieve a lot more productivity from our developers. So what do we mean when we say visual approach? One aspect is that you, instead of coding everything manually and hand coding everything, you do a lot of work by dragging and dropping things, by setting properties in property inspectors, by using quick starts, and all of those leads to a much faster development experience. Okay? You're still creating code, and the code can be managed as code, but the development experience is much more visual in nature. The other thing that this helps us with is reducing coding errors. So when people code manually and they write a lot of lines of code, eventually they're going to have some syntax errors, some mistyped name of a variable, some mistyped operation or operator or something like that. And then it leads to a lot of hours of debugging and trying to figure out where the error happens. When you're doing things visually and declaratively, when you're mapping, for example, variables by doing drag and drop rather than typing in their names, you're less likely to make those coding errors because you're not actually coding that much. And the other thing that visual development helps us with is easier maintainability of the applications that we build. The industry is very dynamic. A lot of our developers are working on one system today. The next day, they might be working on another system. They might be working in another company. And then someone else needs to take over the code that they developed and maintain it. Now, looking at lines and lines of code is very hard to make sense out of it. But if you're looking at a visual image, it becomes much easier to actually understand what the code does. So let's talk about some of the things that the tool and the platform gives us in terms of visualization. The first thing is in actually constructing the user interface. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the actual development experience that our developers are using. In the center of the page, they can see a live preview of their application. They can actually see how the application looks like. They can see it with the actual data in there. And on the left side, they can see a list of all the components they can just drag and drop and position on this visual editor. So they get a very interactive, very real view of the application as they develop. One of the things, by the way, that they can do with this live preview is set the device size that you're watching the application in. So they can see how the application would look like on a mobile device versus on a big screen, and they can adopt the user interface to create a responsive user experience. On the right side, they have a bunch of properties that they can set for each one of those components, making it very easy to control exactly how each component on their page would behave. But our visual experience of development extends beyond just the user interface into also our business logic layer. So when you're creating the business logic for your application, when you're defining, for example, what would happen when someone presses a button in the page, or what happens when a value change in a specific field, what verifications or validation you need to do in those cases, you'll do this by creating what we call action chains. And as you can see, the definition of an action chain is done through a diagram where you basically kind of algorithm the way that your code would execute. So you can start, for example, what we see on the screen right now with calling some REST service, getting the results, checking a condition based on the results, and then either, for example, calling the JavaScript function, maybe assigning a variable or doing something else. Now, when you build it this way, it's much easier to understand what the code does. And it's much easier to also create the code. You don't actually need to write all this JavaScript. We're actually creating this for you over here. Okay. And again, when someone comes to maintain your code, they immediately can understand what the code is doing just by looking at the diagram. Now, another thing that we very often do with our application is we connect our user interface to data. That's basically what Oracle does. We maintain a lot of data about a lot of things, and we build user interfaces to allow you to access the data, interact with the data, do all the CRUD operations. And what we're trying to do here is simplify the way that you bind user interfaces to data. And to that extent, we have the ability to look at various data sources, whether they are business objects or REST services, that you can then just drag and drop into the page. And then we can automate the creation of all sorts of components on that, whether it's if you're reading, for example, a collection of data, you can look at it at a table or a list. If you're bringing in an object, we can help you create a form that would let you update the object, or a form that would let you insert new records, or a delete button, or things like that. All of those are done, again, in a declarative, easy way, building user interfaces that connect to data is basically a drag and drop experience. We also have a lot of quick starts that are associated with specific components. For example, if you have a list of value component, like a single select component where you want to show various values over there, we have a very easy quick start that would allow you to bind it to any REST service. Now, in a lot of cases, when you create those user interfaces, you would want to conditionally show different things to different users. It might be that based on their role in the organization, they might need to see different set of fields. Some fields might need to be hidden. It might also be something that relates to whether your application is showing on a big screen where you can show a lot of fields, or maybe it's on a mobile device, you want to show a fewer fields. And to do that, you would want to introduce some dynamic logic into your application to control which fields are shown when. And again, instead of having to write a lot of if then else and playing with Ajax calls and HTML DOM manipulation in order to hide and show things, we give you a declarative way to define those conditions and decide what you're going to show, again, in a very easy, intuitive way. Now, at the end of the day, what we are creating is a lot of code, which is standard code. It's HTML code, it's JavaScript code, it's JSON code, and this code is always accessible for you. So whenever you're looking at a visual design of your page, there's always a code button at the top that allows you to switch to actually see the code. So for example, you can see here from one of the pages we saw in the previous slide This is the actual code behind it. Okay, over here we can see there's a chart component, for example, and an input date component and things like that. Now, you can very easily also work at the code level if you need to. And the code editor is a powerful code editor. It has all the modern behaviors that you would expect from the code editor, such as code insight, syntax highlighting, auto-completion, things like that. Basically helping our developers, even when they do code, to code in a faster way, again, using standard HTML and JavaScript languages. So that's one aspect of increasing productivity, and that's basically about the development experience. The other way that you can increase developer productivity is to basically promote reusability in your organization. So instead of everyone reinventing the wheel and rewriting again and again things, we're trying to create a situation where it's very easy to consume logic that other developers have already built. Okay? And I'll talk here about several things. One aspect is in terms of the user experience, the Redwood patterns, for example, that we're using. Our design team came up with a set of patterns for how different types of pages should look like. We designed them based on years of studies of users and usability, and we created those best practices. What we then did is we packaged those as reusable templates and patterns that are now shown up to our developers in the component palette. So when they need to create a page, for example, that allows you to search across a table, there's a template for this. When they need to create a page that allows them to edit data for a specific record, there's a template for that. And they can just drag and drop the template over to their page, set a bunch of properties, add the data object, and the page is ready to be used. They don't need to manually go and design each page. Our patterns and templates help them do it much more quickly. Now, the other thing that happens with big applications is that pages tend to grow to be quite complex in terms of the content in them and in terms of the business logic that they contain. And in a lot of cases, a single page might need to have multiple developers working on it at the same time. And one of the things that we allow our developers to do is to create fragments. And fragments are basically areas in the page that are reusable. So for example, if you created some complex UI with some associated complex business logic, this can be packaged as a fragment. And this UI and the business logic can then be injected into other pages in applications. So this extends our reusability. So once you create this business logic, this UI, other developers can just drag and drop it into their page and get the full experience. The other thing that this helps us with is modularity. So when multiple developers are working on the same page, you want to eliminate situations where they override each other changes. By picking those modules and developing them as standalone modular components, we allow our developers to eliminate those clashes. Each developer works on a section of the page, and then we take those fragments and bring them together into a single page that the user is ending up using. Now, beyond a fragment, which is a full section of a page, we also have what we call a component exchange. So those are reusable UI components that developers can use in their application. And those can range in complexity from single fields with some sort of validation, for example, an email validation field, or a phone number validation field, or an address field, to more complex things like a calendar component, or even components that have built-in integration with other stuff inside the Oracle stack. For example, if you need to show an Oracle Analytics report in your page, we have a component that allows you to just bring it into the page, drag and drop, put the component on the page, and you get this functionality of a report, or a functionality of working with the Oracle content and experience and getting data from a document repository. So those reusable components are then exposed in our components exchange, and developers can just drag and drop and add them and install them in their application to use them. And one level of reusability below that is if you have some business logic that you created, some JavaScript functionality that is something that other developers can benefit from, you can package it as a reusable action, and then it becomes a declarative component that you can drag and drop into an action chain from the list of actions that we provide out of the box. But this is, again, something that not Oracle provided, but something that one of your developers created and exposed as a reusable declarative action. The next thing that we'll talk about is teamwork. Again, our applications are pretty big. We have hundreds of developers working on each one of those applications, and we want to encourage teamwork. We want to make sure that they can collaborate effectively. Okay? Enabling multiple developers to collaborate can create a better result at the end of the day because they are able to develop the application faster without having too many conflicts. So to do that, on top of Visual Builder, we have what we call the Visual Builder Studio platform, which is a team collaboration platform and also a continuous integration and continuous delivery engine, which allows our developers to share code using Git repositories and then automate the whole process of deploying this code once changes are done. So into Visual Builder, into the declarative development environment, we built deep integration with Git. Git is probably, that's the most popular version management solution today. And that's basically, again, like the de facto standard that most developers are familiar with. So as developers work on their code in Visual Builder, we have a specific Git panel that shows them, hey, those are the files you modified, those are the files that you updated. And then we allow them to work with branches, doing merge operation, cherry picking changes, doing diffs to see what changed between their code, between versions, or what changed in code that someone else checked in. And they have this full integration with Git at their fingertips. Another thing that we like to do is make sure that the code quality that we are creating is good. And to that extent, we have an audit framework that reviews the code that is generated by Visual Builder by our developers and make sure that they didn't do any mistakes. For example, that all the strings are externalized so it's easy for us to translate the application into different languages, that there are no variables that have been defined and are just sitting there without being used. And this code auditing framework runs in the background as developers work and shows them the information as they work in their development environment. We also run this auditing as part of our CI/CD pipeline. Before we actually deploy code, we make sure that it passes our auditing tests. Then there's the aspect of actual functionality testing. And this is something that is a little tricky when a lot of what you define is declarative actions, when it's not actually code. When you define your actions in a declarative way, you might think that it becomes a little tougher to define tests. So we made it very easy for them. We actually have a utility that reviews your action chain and suggests the test that should be generated. It gives you options for what results are expected based on the variables and the REST calls that you're doing, and it can help you create those tests for your business logic. So we encourage them, or we actually make sure that every business logic that they create, every action chain, has 100% coverage of the code, and then we help them create this, again, driving test-driven development adoption inside the Oracle to new applications. And again, those tests are going to run constantly while you're coding your application. If you break something, you'll immediately get notified about it. We also run those tests, of course, as part of our CI/CD pipeline. And that's a key thing in our development. We picked up DevOps approach and continuous integration, continuous delivery. When code is merged into our Git repository, we can automatically invoke pipelines that will take the code, run audits on it, run tests on it, and then deploy it directly to our QA instances, make sure that our QA team can continue testing the application the minute that changes have happened, and also make it very seamless for us to take changes in the application and deploy them to customers as needed in higher frequency. So I wanted to show you a quick demo of the experience of developing an application with Visual Builder. So I'm going to switch over here to my browser, and that's a key thing to understand. Visual Builder is actually a browser-based development experience, and this is where you would build the application. As you can see, we have an empty page here. This is using one of the Redwood templates for a welcome page, And into this page, we want to then bring a bunch of components. So over here, we have a lot of components divided into various types of categories. And those range from complex visualization using picture charts and tag clouds to charts of all sorts to very basic components. So for example, if I need an input search component, I can just drag and drop it into my page, put it in the search slot in my template, and have that field over here. As I mentioned, I can add suggestions for my search if I want to. In my case, I just want to define a new variable that would be my search string. Okay, so we'll call this one the search string over here. Then I also want to show a collection of data on the page. The Redwood components include a collection container, which I can again drop into my template, into the default area, and this would bring me, again, a set of functionality that I can turn on and off. For example, if I need to have an add button, a delete button, if I have a button that allows me to define columns, I can turn all of those on and off using properties of my template. Let's keep this one quite simple. We'll just have a collection container. Now I need to get data into the page. To do that, we can go into our service connection and define a connection to a new service. I can use open API specs. I can point to an endpoint, and I can also look at my catalog of services. Over here, you would see, for example, all our SaaS applications and the services they expose, as well as our Oracle integration product, okay, which allows me to get data from external systems. So you saw there, for example, the sales and service, the HCM, ERP, all of those apps have catalogs of services that I can access and use in my application. In my case, I'm going to go over to my CRM system, to the Oracle sales and service, and I'm going to pick up the list of objects that I want to include in my application. As you can see, there's a lot of objects that are exposed over here. I'm interested specifically in the accounts objects, so let's expand that. The accounts object has a lot of related objects that I can access for account, right? But I'm just interested in the top level of account, so let's just click to create that connection. So now I have this REST service available for me. If I want to add data from it to my page, I can just go over here to my data palette. Under CRM, I would see the account object, and I can drag and drop it into my collection container to create, for example, a table. The next thing I would need to do is decide which fields about the account I want to show here. So let's say what I'm doing right now is building a little system that helps me track the revenue for specific accounts for this year and the next year. So the fields that I'll be interested in are the revenue-related fields, but I would also need to know some things about the name of the organization that I'm working with, maybe the name of the CEO, and then let's look up some of the revenue fields. And we'll pick up the current and the next year fiscal revenue. I can also define searches. So again, we make it very easy for you to go over and say, for example, that I want to be able to search by the organization name based on my search string, the variable we defined earlier. So this is how easy it is to do interaction with the Oracle SaaS data and build a page that gets me the data and allows me to search. Now, you can see the live preview here. I can actually switch to live mode, which would allow me to interact with the page. For example, if I type star, I would get organizations where star is part of their name. Now, in a lot of cases, you don't just want to show data, you also want to allow people to edit the data. This is why we have Quick Start. And a Quick Start can be used, for example, to create an edit page, which would allow me to go and edit data about an organization. So again, let's look up the name of the organization, and we look up the revenue, and we'll add those fields into an edit page. Okay. This now creates the edit page, and on my home page, I can now select an employee. Again, if I'm in live mode, click on it and go and edit the employee. Now, if I don't want this edit button, if I want, for example, to directly be able to click on one of those accounts, I can pick up a hyperlink, drag and drop it onto this field, and hook up some logic behind this hyperlink. What happens when I click on it? And over here, you can see my action chains. For example, I can have an if statement to say if this, then that, or something like that. Let's do an undo here. or I can call one of the action chains that are already built into my page with a quick start. For example, the navigate to edit account. I need to say which account I'm editing. So this is how we do variable assignment. Again, simple drag and drop. And now if I'll go back to my page, go into live mode, look up, for example, one of our companies, click on it, and I would go to my edit page where I can continue to edit my application and data. Okay. One of the things I can do here, by the way, is I can say, hey, I want to have here some business logic that someone else developed. There's a fragment that I need to add to my page over here, and I can select a fragment that another developer created. Okay. This would bring in a whole section into my page where I can play with the revenue number for this account and see some data. Okay, for example, you can see as I increase the number, the values over here change, the color of the values change. If I'll actually do a lot of money, I'll get the green thing here. So this whole thing is built as a fragment that another developer developed and included in my application. Okay? And I can simply drag and drop it and put it on my page. Now, one of the things here is, for example, again, look at this calculate button. It has some business logic behind it that does something. Now, maybe someone by mistake went over to one of the steps here and looked at it and by mistake, for example, changed this multiplication to be an add number. Okay. So again, we have some complex business logic here. It gets some data, invokes some functions, and then gets the result and returns them. If someone changed this while working on the page without paying attention too much, you might not actually discover this unless you have tests defined for your application. And the nice thing for us is that we do have this testing framework built into our application, and you can see the results of the tests over here. So at any point of time, I can click run all and get the result and see, hey, there's a test that failed. I can click go over, see exactly where the failure happened. Okay, over here in this test case, it's failed, so I can then go over, fix the issue, and we'll go over here again, switch it back to what it should have been, okay, and save the changes. Now, if we run the test again, test passed, and we're good to go. At any point of time, you can also click to run the application and see your application in a live mode, basically allowing you to then go over our application, or go over our accounts in this case, look up a specific account, go over and edit the data about this account, indicate their new expected revenue, click save, and this would save the data back into Oracle SaaS. So as you can see, in about 5 minutes of development, I'm able to create a full application, all done in a declarative way using Visual Builder. So this was a quick recap of some of the techniques and the tools that Oracle is using to help our developers be more productive. And the key thing for you to take away from here is that you can leverage the exact same platform to build your own application. Visual Builder is the tool that we are using internally inside Oracle to build those enterprise applications. It's also the tool that you can get for your own company as a cloud service. It's a managed cloud service that allows you to do managed development, managed deployment of your application, and build your web and mobile application in a faster way using the same techniques, same components, same patterns that Oracle is using internally. So hopefully this has been educational. You learned some of the stuff that Oracle is doing, and you can see how this applies to your own experience and your own company. And we'll be happy to see you using this product and learning how to increase your developer productivity. Thanks for attending today's seminar, and hope to see you in other seminars.